Sara ਨੂੰ ਪਿਆਰ ਭਰੀ ਸਤਿ ਸ਼੍ਰੀ ਅਕਾਲ ਮੈਂ ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਆਪਣੀ Sonia West. We're here in Surrey for a ethnic media roundtable with the leader of the Conservative Party, Pierre Poilievre. He's going to be here shortly with his beautiful wife, Mrs. Poilievre. So stay tuned and let's have a look at what he has to say about Canada and the future.
Thank you very much, everyone, for coming. It's great to be back in beautiful British Columbia. Anna and I just arrived with the kids very early this morning, and they're a little bit grouchy, so we decided not to bring them along. They had a late night. But it is great to be back here to meet with so many good friends and to celebrate the bright future that we have bringing home Canada's promise. As many of you already know, I got into politics to bring home the promise of Canada, to make this again a country where hard work gets you a great life in a beautiful house on a safe street, protected by proud troops under a proud flag. And I've been working towards that goal for a long time. But of course, unfortunately, after the lost Liberal decade of rising costs and crime and a falling economy now under America's thumb, that promise is broken. And the question in this election is whether you think the Liberals deserve a fourth term in power, or whether you think it's time for a change to put Canada first with a new Conservative government that will axe taxes, build homes, lock up criminals, ban drugs, secure the borders, rearm our military, and rebuild our economy so we can stand up to President Trump and the Americans from a place of strength. And on that point, I strongly condemn the latest threats of tariffs the President has put forward. And I say very clearly to him that the era of Canadian economic weakness is coming to an end. While tariffs might do short-term damage to our country, my message to President Trump is that if he decides to turn on our economy, over the next 4 years, we will rebuild and relaunch our economy. We will cut taxes and remove red tape to develop our resources. We'll knock down provincial trade barriers to sell and buy across Canada. We'll sell to other markets. If President Trump doesn't want our incredible resources, talent, and products, then the rest of the world will take them. And we will open up new markets that will make us more self-reliant and strong so we can stand on our own 2 feet and stand up to the Americans. We need to reverse all of the Liberal policies of the last decade to make that happen. As you know, under the Liberals of Carney and Trudeau, housing costs have doubled, rising faster than any other G7 country. Vancouver is now the most expensive housing market in North America and the third most expensive market in the entire world, worse than New York, London, England, Chicago, Los Angeles. All of this because Liberals inflated demand with out-of-control money printing and population growth, and block supply by funding bureaucracies that prevent builders from providing houses. We have a common sense plan for that. I will axe the federal sales tax on new homes of up to $1.3 million to save buyers $65,000. I'll pressure the provinces to do the same, saving hundreds of thousands of dollars. And we'll incentivize the municipalities to free up permits, speed up approvals, and cut development charges to build 15% more per year. We'll sell off 6,000 federal buildings and thousands of acres of federal land to build the homes of the future. But for people to afford those monthly payments, we need to cut income tax. Tax is now taking up more than food, clothing, and shelter combined after the lost Liberal decade. My plan will cut income taxes by 15%, saving thousands of dollars for the average working family. We will get rid of the full carbon tax. Right now, of course, the tax still applies. The Liberals have said they're going to hide it at the gas pumps for the 30 days leading up to the election. They're the ones that brought the tax in. It's been in place for 7 years. They've said that if we don't raise it, the planet will burn. And now they expect us to believe that they've changed their mind because they hide it from gas pumps for 30 days. We know that if Mr. Carney and the Liberals are reelected, they will bring in a bigger carbon tax that will drive our industry south where there is no carbon tax. My plan, and I'm the only one who will not only get rid of the tax, but I'll get rid of the entire carbon tax law. I will axe the tax for everyone, for everything, for real, for good, for a change. We will lower taxes. We'll pass a bring-it-home tax cut on work, investment, home building, and energy to bring home production to our country. And speaking of bringing home, we need to produce our resources for a change. That means repealing the anti-energy laws, C-69, getting rid of the energy cap the Liberals have put in that will stop oil and gas from growing in Canada. I will get rid of that cap. It means abandoning the radical net zero insanity that both Mr. Carney and Trudeau have pushed, that drives down production in Canada and drives jobs out of this nation. I will rapidly approve pipelines, mines, LNG liquefaction plants, forestry projects, and other resource endeavors that will allow us to export our goods and services overseas rather than just to the United States. This is how we're going to build an economic fortress here at home, make our own stuff and profit from our own resources. We should be the richest country in the world. We have the third biggest supply of oil, fifth biggest producer of natural gas, biggest supply of uranium and potash. We have 4 coasts, in fact, 4 oceanic coasts or coasts to the ocean. We have the most coastline of any country in the world, but our ports are terrible. The Port of Vancouver is one of the worst ports in the world. It's ranked, I think, 368 out of 374. Imagine if we had the best port in the world in Vancouver. All the goods and services that would be moving out and coming in, supplying our customers with lower priced goods and our workers with more markets to hit around the world. That's a federal port. After the lost Liberal decade, it's broken. We're going to fix the port, make it work, get our goods and services moving overseas rather than just south to the Americans. That's how we're going to break our dependence on the Americans and unleash production. We'll also do something called the shovel-ready Canada First zones. These will be areas that the governments get together and they draw a big line, a big circle. Say inside this circle, industrial activities are pre-permitted. We have pre-permits for pipelines, mines, LNG plants, factories, and other industrial activity. So you don't have to apply and wait 9 years. It's already permitted as long as you hit the standards and specifications that are pre-published and available online. And that's how we're going to get these projects built quickly. We want to back up the trades by giving the funds to union halls to train 350,000 young tradespeople and restore the $4,000 apprenticeship grant. So we have the boots and not just the suits in order to build the future. And we want our immigrants to get the jobs in their professions. Right now we have 20,000 immigrant doctors and 32,000 immigrant nurses blocked from working in their professions. When I got my eye surgery done, I met the technician, and he's a surgeon, an eye surgeon in Abu Dhabi. He works in Canada for 20 days with his family, and then he goes to Abu Dhabi for 10 days doing eye surgeries. So he's qualified to be an eye surgeon in UAE, but only in Canada can he only be a technician. It's almost like Emirati eyeballs are different than Canadian eyeballs. It's nuts. They say in Toronto, if you have a heart attack, don't call 911, call an Uber because the driver is probably a doctor. And so we have our doctors driving taxis rather than working on the front lines of healthcare. But we need to change that. We know the solution. We just need to do in the professions what we did in the trades back in 1952, and that has worked ever since. We have a red seal in the trades for 70 years. If you want to be a mechanic, you take the red seal. You get a stamp, but you can work as a mechanic anywhere in Canada. So what we need to do is create a national blue seal and then invite the provinces to sign on to it and recognize anyone who's got a blue seal to work in a hospital, so that an immigrant doctor, nurse, engineer, architect comes here, they take the blue seal, they get licensed, they get working, making more money, paying more tax, reducing the wait times in our hospital, bringing home better paychecks. But we want them to bring those paychecks home to safe neighborhoods. So we have to stop the crime. Crime has been raging out of control after the lost Liberal decade. They have passed catch and release criminal justice, where they allow the same repeat violent offenders out again and again. In Vancouver, they had to arrest the same 40 offenders 6,000 times. So, that means each offender is arrested every 2 days on average for a whole year. They're basically doing crime all day, every day, but they're being released. I'm going to repeal that law. It's C-75, and I'm going to ban anyone with a long track record of crime from bail, probation, parole, or house arrest. There'll be mandatory jail time and no escape from it. And for serious repeat offenders, there will be life sentences. That includes for fentanyl. If you sell 40 milligrams of fentanyl, you've sold enough fentanyl to kill 20 people. If you are selling fentanyl in mass quantities, you are a mass murderer, because there's guarantee. It's like firing a gun into a crowded stadium. You might not know who you're killing, but there's almost a certainty that somebody's going to die. So I've announced that we will impose mandatory life sentences for anyone caught trafficking or producing more than 40 milligrams of fentanyl. We will also secure our borders with high-powered scanners and 2,000 more CBSA officers to interrupt stolen cars, drugs, guns. We'll have high-powered surveillance towers to stop border crossing. And we will pay for this by canceling the ridiculous Liberal gun grab, where they go after licensed, law-abiding, trained and tested sport shooters and hunters, costing billions of dollars in law enforcement resources that go after people who are not a problem. Hunters are not the problem. The problem is the criminals. So we lock up the criminals, secure the borders, stop the crime, and invest in treatment and recovery to get people off drugs and bring our loved ones home drug-free. We'll rebuild our military and reestablish our alliances overseas with good democratic allies, trading partners, and friends. We're going to be, this is the choice we have now. After the lost Liberal decade of rising costs and crime and a falling Canadian economy now under the thumb of the Americans, are we going to give the Liberals a fourth term in power? Or do you think it's time to put Canada first, with a new Conservative government that will axe taxes, lock up criminals, build homes, unleash our resources, bring home our jobs, so that we can stand up to the Americans from a position of strength? And most of all, bring home the Canadian promise in a country where anyone who works hard gets a great life, in a beautiful home, on a safe street, under a proud flag. Canada first. Let's bring it home. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, let's
Thank
take
you,
some
everyone.
questions.
We will now take questions from the floor.
The lost Liberal decade of rising taxes, costs, and crime, and a falling economy that's now under America's thumb, we can't give them a fourth term. It used to be that prior to this lost Liberal decade, if a young person got a decent education, they could go out and get an excellent job that would buy them a house in a beautiful neighborhood. But what is happening is our economy is being strangled by taxes, red tape, and bureaucracy. So it's hard for businesses to grow here. Capital goes where capital grows. Right now, taxes are so high that you can't get a return, so businesses have moved $500 billion to the U.S. That creates shopping centers and businesses and mines and builds homes. Canadian investment creating American jobs. I want to bring that home. We're going to pass a bring it home tax cut on work, investment, energy, home building, and making stuff in Canada. We're going to bring home our resources, by quickly approving resource projects. That will bring massive job creation, particularly in the trades where guys who wear boots and hard hats will be making $250,000 a year as pipe fitters and boilermakers and welders, but also there'll be business jobs in corporate headquarters in Vancouver, where you'll need accountants and business strategists and marketing teams who will be working to sell those resources overseas. That is how we're going to unleash the incredible potential of our country, because we can and we will be the richest country in the world. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Next
you.
question.
Go ahead.
So first of all, welcome to Surrey, and it's nice to see you again. You're pretty and smart.
Yes, that's right.
So welcome, Mrs. Poilievre. Mr. Poilievre, welcome again.
I think she's pretty and smart too. You weren't just.
Oh yes, that's right. You as well, Anna. So, Mr. Poilievre, Vancouver is the third least affordable housing market, as you mentioned in your opening, behind Hong Kong and Sydney. Most newcomers and young people have given up on the dream of home ownership. In fact, my kids this morning were talking with me about this interview, and they said, "Do you think we'll ever own our own home?" And I laughed and I said, "Sophia and Taylor, I don't even own my own home. So it's looking bleak for me. Wow. I don't know about their future." We hear a lot of politicians promise to make housing affordable. How is your plan any different?
Mm-hmm. So, a great question. Look, after the lost Liberal decade, housing costs have literally doubled. They've gone up faster in Canada than in any other G7 country over the last decade. If we give them a fourth Liberal term in power, it'll only get worse. Why is housing so expensive? The answer is, what's going into the cost? You break down the cost of a house. What is it? Is it that all of a sudden lumber costs more? No, that's not it. Land? Well, we have the most land per capita of almost any developed country in the world, so we have no shortage of land. Labor? We actually have unemployed trades workers, so it's not like we've run out of workers. What's driving the cost? Well, the answer is, in Vancouver, 60% of the cost of a new home is government. It's taxes, which comprise 30% of the home. Then there's the delays, the lobbyists, the consultants, the lawyers. All of that equals 60% of the cost of a new home in Vancouver today. If you want to look it up, C.D. Howe did a study. They compared the cost of building a home to the cost of buying a home in Vancouver. And the gap was $1.3 million. So the cost of a brand newly built home is $1.3 million higher than the cost of the physical cost of building it. So that's all government. I'm going to cut that cost down by getting rid of the GST on new homes, pressuring the provinces to do the same, using infrastructure funds to incentivize municipalities to speed up permits, free up land, cut development charges, sell off 6,000 federal buildings, thousands of acres of federal land. And we are going to cap population growth so that it's always below the growth in the housing stock. We should be adding housing at a faster rate than we add people in order to get rid of the gap that has formed over the last 10 years. Mm-hmm. That will mean that we bring home the promise of Canada, that anybody who works hard gets a nice house. You deserve one, so do your kids, and it's going to happen. Thank you. One of the worst things about the lost Liberal decade is that they have abused and ignored our Western Canadian industries. They did. The Liberals had everyone focuses on Trump, but the Liberals had 3 presidents to work with: Obama, Biden, and Trump. And they never got the softwood lumber tariffs lifted. When Prime Minister Harper was in power, he got the softwood lumber tariffs lifted for a full decade. He did it 80 days after he became Prime Minister. In fact, the Americans even reimbursed the tariffs they had collected. Then Trudeau took office, the tariffs went back in, Biden doubled the tariffs, and now Trump is threatening to raise them even further. One of my top priorities in negotiating with the United States is to get the tariffs off our lumber. In the meantime, I think the best way to spark demand for British Columbia lumber is to build more homes. If we can supercharge home building, then we'll create new domestic demand for the wood that goes into those homes, creating jobs both for the trades workers and the loggers. And that'll be one of the ways we go about boosting the lumber industry in this country. We're also going to stop the insane environmental extremism of Fisheries and Opens Canada that are assaulting the fisheries in this province. Our fisheries are under attack by government. I want to allow our fisheries to grow again, give more local control over the licenses and the quota to real fishermen, not just corporations who have who own the licenses, so that BC can once again bring home the catch. Thank you very much. Well, the local Conservative Party members decide who they nominate, and we need to have strong voice for the Chinese community in Canada. We're very inspired by the fact that the Chinese community has stood up against the liberal drug legalization. Liberals have been trying to legalize drugs with the NDP. It caused a total nightmare. They're giving out tax-funded opioids, and they try to put these consumption sites in the Chinese communities in Richmond. I've been the only one speaking out against that. I will be banning the drugs. I'll be shutting down the consumption sites. We'll be bringing in tougher laws. This is what the Chinese community has been asking for, and that's what I will be delivering. You know, the last Liberal decade has allowed just crime, chaos, drugs, and disorder to terrorize our streets, and it will only get worse if they get a fourth term in power. And that's why we're going to work with our local candidates to ban drugs, to bring in treatment, shut down the consumption sites, and make the streets of Richmond and all of Canada safe one more time. Thank you.
President Donald Trump has recently sent a letter to Iran's supreme leader to negotiate on the nuclear front, and he also gave a deadline of 2 months, or else all options are on the table. Now, Canada is, of course, home to a very strong and successful Iranian diaspora, and many of them are not interested in seeing any political leaders negotiate with the Islamic Republic. Number one, your reaction to President Trump's diplomatic overture, and number two, how would you approach the Islamic Republic of Iran should you become Prime Minister?
I'm not interested in negotiating with the Islamic Republic. I don't trust them. I think they're liars. I think they will promise anything you want them to get their oil and gas back on the world market, and then they'll use all the revenues from those sales to fund terrorism and try to obliterate our values. So I don't trust them. I was the one who led the charge to ban the IRGC. I supported the Women Life Freedom movement. I want us to identify all of the IRGC terrorists and activists that are in our country that are not permanent residents or citizens, so they can be deported from our country. And we will keep sanctions against the Islamic Republic. And so I'm not interested in talking with them. I think it's a terrible regime. It's the most dangerous sponsor of terror anywhere in the world. And we need to take back control of our country. After the lost Liberal decade, these foreign aggressive regimes think they can turn Canada into their playground and terrorize our Persian and Jewish and other populations. We're not going to allow that anymore. We will take back control of our streets and our nation. We'll secure our borders, and we'll put Canada first for a change by standing up against terrorist regimes around the world. Thank you. After the lost Liberal decade of rising costs and danger in our streets, Canadian immigrants are suffering more than anyone else. They're living in extremely expensive communities where it's very hard to pay rent, and increasingly the Liberal justice system has made those communities more dangerous. And that's only going to get worse if the Liberals get elected to a fourth term. Part of the problem with their approach is that they've gotten completely out of control. Like, they allowed massive fraud in the international student program for people to come who weren't actually students. They were really just low-wage workers, not bad people. It's just that corporations were taking advantage of them to drive down wages. Same with the temporary foreign worker program. The Liberals are bringing in people in cities where there's high unemployment. And that's just because the corporations want to pay lower wages. The refugee system, they've allowed for false refugee claims to pile up in very large numbers. And of course, the population growth has been too fast. You know, they're growing population by 3% when our housing stock grows by 1%. You do that for long enough, eventually you have a housing shortage. So my plan is, one, to end the fraud in the international student program, strictly limit the temporary foreign worker program to cases where the employer genuinely proves there's no Canadian that can take the job. There should be no temporary foreign workers for hotel, retail, and restaurants when in a place where unemployment is above 6%. Those businesses should hire Canadians rather than TFWs. And then we have to cap population growth below the growth in the housing stock. So we will have a very simple mathematical formula that says that population growth this year must be a lower rate than the growth in the housing stock in last year. So that the point is that let's always add homes faster than we add people. For the next decade, that will allow us to eliminate the shortage in the housing so people can actually find a place to live. And then when people get here, we need better integration. Like I said, a blue seal is the best way to turn our immigrants into doctors and engineers. 85% of Filipino nurses, for example, cannot practice nursing in Canada. In the States, they can take an international exam and get working in a month. So why don't we have that here? That will be better jobs, better integration, better healthcare for all of us. One of the mysteries, when you look at the data, is the fact that we've signed trade agreements with Europe, but we haven't seen an increase in our share of exports going to Europe. Same is true with Asia. We have all these deals, but for some reason the trade volumes are not rising as a share of our GDP. And the reason is we don't have the physical infrastructure to get our most valuable resources to those markets. Whether the environmental extremists want to admit it or not, our number one net export is oil and gas. That is just a mathematical fact. It's 75% of our trade surplus is oil and gas. But right now, the Americans get 100% of our gas and 90% of our oil. Why? Not because the world doesn't want it, but because we have no way of getting it to them. We don't have one export terminal up and running for natural gas. The Americans built 7 in the last decade. The Qataris have doubled their production. Europe is crying out for our energy. France just signed a supply deal with Qatar. That could have been us. Japan is signing a deal with Alaska. That could have been us. The Greeks, the Germans, the French, the Ukrainians have all asked to buy our natural gas. But Justin Trudeau said, and I quote, "There's no business case for it." Well, why not get out of the way and let businesses decide if there's a business case? Give them the permit and let them put their own money on the line. I'm not proposing to put taxpayer money on the line. There is a huge business case because natural gas goes for $4 in Canada and it goes for $15 in Europe. You can take something that's worth $4 and sell it for $15 and do that billions of times every month. That's a business case. So I will repeal the liberal no-do pipelines law, repeal the energy cap, grant rapid-fire permits for LNG, sign supply agreements with major European countries, and we will sell hundreds of billions of dollars of gas. By the way, we're in a way better position than the Americans. It takes 11 days to ship from BC to Asia. It takes 20 days from the US Gulf Coast. It's 25% less energy intensive to liquefy gas in BC than it is in the US Gulf Coast because of the cold weather. You liquefy gas by pulling the heat out of it. We have less heat. So it's a lot cheaper to liquefy gas here. So why not take advantage of the clean hydro in BC, Newfoundland, Quebec, liquefy the gas, send it off to both Asia and Europe. And by the way, you want to help the environment? Natural gas displacing coal-fired electricity in India alone would be enough to displace 2.5 billion tons of greenhouse gases. That's 3 times the emissions of all of Canada's economy for a year. This is a much better way to help the environment. Let's sell our natural gas, and we will do it. The Liberals will never do it. They're against it for fake environmental reasons. I will get it done. Thank you. Mr. Carney has the same Liberal MPs, the same Liberal ministers, the same Liberal strategists, the same Liberal promises as the last 10 years of Justin Trudeau. He was Trudeau's economic advisor from 2020 to present. That's 5 years. And I might add, those were the worst 5 years of the Trudeau government. It was in those 5 years that the housing costs doubled, that the fentanyl crisis went crazy, that we had the worst inflation in 40 years. So if you think that things are going great, well, you'll be happy with Mark Carney and a 4th term for the Liberals. But if you think it's time to put our country first, then for a change, then you have to elect a common sense conservative government that will axe the taxes, build the homes, permit the mines, pipelines, and other resource projects to bring home our jobs and resources and stand up to the Americans from a position of strength. Yes, like I said, we need a blue seal. What we need to do is go from a bureaucratic process to a merit process. So right now, a skilled immigrant who wants to work in a profession has to go through a rigorous 7 or 8 year process where bureaucrats try to research the educational history of that immigrant. It's way too complicated. And they always find a reason to say no. I always find a reason for you to say, oh, you need to take another course, and you need to do this, and you need to do that. What we need to do is test whether the immigrant can actually do the job by their competence. I'll give you an example. I was speaking to the Aviation Association. There's a guy who worked as a aviation mechanic for Air Canada in Germany. He's a German guy. He meets a Canadian girl, moves to Canada as an immigrant from Germany. He says, oh, good, I already work for a Canadian company. I'll just keep doing the same job. He said, no, you can't work as an aviation mechanic for Air Canada in Toronto, even though you were working as an aviation mechanic for Air Canada in Munich. Same job, same planes, same company. And somehow none of the planes fell out of the sky when he was working on them. So if the guy could just take a test and prove that he meets the Canadian standard of knowledge for working on aircraft, then he'd be able to get to work. It really is that simple. That's what we do in most of the trades that are covered by the Red Seal. So why not just take the Red Seal model and use it for the professions with a new Blue Seal? The other thing I'm going to do is we're going to back up low-cost loans to immigrants who are almost qualified but need to take 6 months off work. Because often they arrive penniless, they have to work minimum wage just to feed themselves. A small microloan, maybe $15,000, is all they need to take time off work for 3-4 months, study, and take the test. And then they can pay the loan back. We lend out that same money to another person, and the same dollars can be lent out over and over and over again. This was pioneered in Calgary by the Immigrant Access Fund. They have a 97% loan repayment rate, and the average immigrant who goes through the program sees their income rise by 300%, which is obvious. If you go from being an Uber driver to being an engineer, you can expect your income's going to triple, quadruple. So these are the common sense ideas we have to get our professional immigrants licensed and working in Canada. Thank you. Yes, I support accelerating the Hong Kong cases. A lot of Hong Kongers want to come here because of the human rights abuses they're facing, and they want to start a new life here. We already have an incredibly successful history in Canada of integrating and welcoming people from Hong Kong, particularly to British Columbia, where they've come, built incredible businesses, have been great entrepreneurs, exactly the kinds of people we need to have in our country. So I would be excited to work with the community to expedite the end to these backlogs, speed up the processing, and bring a lot of these young entrepreneurial Hong Kong residents to Canada so they can start up some businesses, create some jobs, and help us make Canada the richest country in the world. What do you think? Good idea? The Canadians in Hong Kong they're obviously entrepreneurs. They're often investors, business people, and we need that back in Canada. The problem is that this has been a very hostile place to invest and start a business during the lost Liberal decade of rising crime costs and a falling economy. I mean, if we give the Liberals a fourth term, it will be even worse. But I want to make this an attractive place for all the best investors from around the world to bring their brain power and their money so we can start businesses and unlock the incredible potential of this country of ours. So my message to Canadians in Hong Kong is come home to Canada. Let's build the best, the richest, the freest economy in the world right here. We need your brain power. We need your smarts. And we will make sure you have a beautiful, free country to live in where you can fulfill your God-given potential. Thank you. It's not the first time I've heard that.
Thank you. Thank you for your question. I am proud of my Latin roots, what it means for me to be a Latin Canadian. I think that as a lot of immigrants, we share the same story. We come here for the Canadian promise. We come here to work hard, to integrate. We don't come here for freebies. We just want to be recognized, like my husband was talking about the Blue Seal. So for me, as a Canadian Latina, I'm just hoping that other immigrants, especially women, can look at my story and how the hard work and everything paid off and my family, and that you can see yourself through that. And one of the things that I'm working on, it's also human trafficking. It's something that, as a former political advisor to the leader of the Senate, it's a file that I worked on, and so I'm very passionate about that. I want to bring awareness to that. Human trafficking for the purpose of sexual exploitation. There's also for labor as well. That's something that the immigrant community has suffered a lot from. So I'm just hoping to continue on working on that and showcase that the Canadian promise is possible, and hopefully we can bring that back. And just to go back on housing that we were talking about, how it's not possible anymore. In 2012, I was 25 years old, single still, and and I was working really hard in the Senate, and I was making about $50,000 a year, and I was able to save about $25,000, and I was able to buy myself a little apartment, a 2-bedroom apartment that it's mine.
It's like a townhouse. It's a townhouse.
It's a townhouse, and it's mine. And that was in 2012. And that's what the Canadian promise was. If you work hard, you can make it. And I was only 25 and single. And that was 3 years before the Liberals took office. And as someone from Venezuela, that's what all the money printing can cause inflation. I really think that all of that put us in a vulnerable situation where now our youth, our immigrants, cannot afford housing. And I think that I appreciate that you asked the question, because I love all of my husband's policies, but you also need to know and understand the family behind those policies, because that explains to you the why we're doing it and why I stand by my husband's side. Thank you.
The lost Liberal decade has been bad for everything, economy, the cost of living, but nowhere worse than in drugs. This radical ideology, they call it the safe supply, where the government spends tax dollars to buy opioids and give them out. And they say, well, it's all safe. Well, it's not safe. We know it's not safe, and we know those drugs are being resold to children, and then the profits are being spent buying fentanyl. They also decriminalized heroin, crack, cocaine, and other hard drugs that made this really the ground zero in the world for drug overdoses. British Columbia is really the worst place in the world for overdoses. It's incredible to see the 300% increase in overdose deaths over the last Liberal decade. I want to go in exactly the opposite direction. First of all, I will ban the federal government from funding any opioid distribution. Second of all, I will bring in a hard ban on all serious drugs possession. Third, we will invest in treatment and recovery with the goal of bringing our loved ones home drug-free. And I will make sure that the treatment centers that get funded are dedicated to drug-free outcomes. In fact, we're going to set it up in a way that we pay for results. So for a treatment center to get funded, they're going to have to prove that they're getting people clean through subsequent drug tests. I'm also going to make sure that organizations that in the past have participated in the distribution of opioids will be ineligible for any federal funding on drug treatment. Finally, we will bring in life sentences for anyone caught trafficking or producing more than 40 milligrams of fentanyl or similar drugs. That is the only way we're going to end this crisis. And we're going to do it. We're going to overcome this. My message to anyone who's addicted to drugs today is hang on, have hope, help is on the way. Thank you. First of all, we understand the need for caregivers, and we also know there's a big shortfall for in-home caregiving that many temporary foreign workers, particularly from the Philippines, have helped relieve. We don't want to stop that. We understand there are a lot of people who are seriously ill, debilitated, in their final years who require that kind of care. Where I think this program has been in excess has been in low-wage retail, in places where there's already unemployment. That's where we have to slow the program down because it's driving wages down into the ground so that Starbucks and Tim Hortons can pay less wages. I don't think that's right. Those who've come here, followed the rules, paid their taxes, and who speak English or French or are very close to learning it, I believe there should be a path to permanency. Those who can't stay employed because there's not enough demand or who have broken laws or come in illegally, those are the ones that will have to be asked to return to their country of origin. But we have to clean up the abuse in the system, stop the fraud by employers, get rid of all of this, the buying and selling of LMIAs that is going on in the black market, and frankly rescue the people who've been basically pushed into the black market or getting paid cash, and sometimes they end up in human trafficking as well. That has to end. So we're going to clean up the system. We're going to get back to its intent, which is to fill in gaps where Canadians can't or won't do the job for real. That's when we need temporary foreign workers, but not as just a trick by corporate greedy corporations to drive wages down for Canadians. Thank you so much.
So Pierre Poilievre talked a lot about housing and drugs and also immigration. So many topics to talk about. We ran out of time. A lot of the media had questions, but he didn't get everybody's questions. But he did answer our question at Sanjha TV about housing. So he's promising that he is going to make housing more affordable. And he says the cost of a house right now, $1.3 million is just the expenses that are extra. So ਜਿੰਨੀ ਘਰ ਦੀ ਕੀਮਤ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ ਉਹ ਤੋਂ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ 1.3 million just paperwork ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ, government fees ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਆ. So that's why we can't afford a home in the Lower Mainland. So he made those things clear, and he's making promises pay future ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜੇ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ Prime Minister ਦੀ seat ਮਿਲ ਜਾਵੇ, then he will change that for us. Thank you so much for watching. We'll bring you all the updates and the rally this evening. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Sonia West for Sanjha TV. Sat Shri Akal.